This is Michael Waitze, and welcome back to ATP. Borders are becoming blurry, and not just on maps, but in global finance as well. In a world moving towards always-on economies and instant value exchange, what does finance without borders actually mean in 2025? And what foundational things really need to change to make this vision a reality? To answer these questions and more, we are joined by Naveen Mallela, the global co-head of Kinexys and an MD at JP Morgan Chase. From cross-platform friction to the tokenization of real-world assets, which hopefully we'll get to as well, Naveen can break down what's next in cross-border finance, how institutions may need to shift their mindsets, and why democratizing access to financial systems could redefine global wealth distribution. Naveen, thank you so much for coming to the show. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for joining us at Money 2020 in Europe. How are you?
Pleasure to be here, Michael. Doing very well, thank you.
It's awesome to have you. Let's just jump right into this. What does finance without borders really mean in 2025? And what foundational changes or shifts need to happen to make it really come to true?
I do think that we are at an inflection point when it comes to finance, Michael. You've talked about always-on economy.
Yeah.
Always-on economy needs always-on money.
Yeah,
right?
I like it.
That is foundational. And that's what's most exciting about it. Especially payments are so foundational to the rewiring of financial market infrastructure. Payments have come a long way, but in many ways they haven't as well. So domestic payments have become 24/7, they've become instant. It's a sea change of difference from what it was maybe 20 years back. But cross-border payments, I somewhat say provocatively, is still what it was maybe 30, 40 years back. Ever since the advent of SWIFT,
right.
I say that cross-border payments has not changed all that much.
So this kind of reminds me a little bit about long-distance telephones.
Yeah.
Right. When I was a kid, I lived in Massachusetts. To call Connecticut was like an arm and a leg.
Yeah.
But to call the next town was relatively free, right? It was cheap. And I feel like cross-border payments and domestic payments are kind of in that stage.
Yeah.
But why?
Yeah.
And here's the thing. Once like Skype was invented and you can see the connectivity, long distance telephones just went away.
Yeah.
Because I could use TCP IP to make phone calls.
Yeah.
So what has to change to make cross-border like domestic payments?
So what money is complex, right? Like, because you have many different currencies, you have many different governments, and not many governments are willing to cede control of sovereign money or cede control of sovereignty.
Yeah.
So which means that domestic payment infrastructure is a different beast from cross-border payments.
Because they have complete control over it.
Yeah, they have complete control over it.
Right.
So the access to domestic money and domestic payment infrastructure for the longest of time has been intermediated through what is known as correspondent banks.
Yeah.
We don't think that's going to change. Like, people just generally, in my view, simplistically talk about, CBDCs can make money peer-to-peer, cross-border, or stable coins can make money peer-to-peer. I think till the point of time that governments are keen to maintain sovereignty of money and sovereignty of payment systems, access will always be intermediated through resident banks.
So, but if that never changes, right? What's going to make money always on? Because I love that terminology. I said if the economies were always on, the money always has to be on.
Yeah.
What is going to have to change if the correspondent banks are still going to be involved? And I think you're right, actually. What needs to change, stablecoin or no stablecoin, to be able to say, I want to send money on a Saturday afternoon from yen to dollars, so from Tokyo to New York, and I want it to settle that day, just like it does if I want to send Martin Thai baht. I just scan on his phone and he has it.
So that's a great point, right? Like, what has to change? First, all banks need to work 24/7. The ledgers need to work 24/7.
Yeah.
Like, why does cross-border payments not work? Because there are many different banks in the chain and not all of them work. Each bank has their own cutoffs. So that's what makes cross-border money slow, cross-border payments slow. So banks need to work 24/7. Banks need to come on what my belief is shared ledger infrastructure.
Yep.
So each bank, instead of having their own ledger, instead of having their core banking system, needs to come on shared ledgers so that the debits and credits is what is called, is atomic, right? Like, payments are no longer sequential.
So isn't this what some of the big, I don't want to call them neo-payment companies have done?
Yeah.
So if you look at a company, and I'm just going to pick one of them, but I think this is true for all of them. If you look at a company like TransferWise, what is it really transferring?
Yeah.
So what they've done, I think, is I have dollars. They have a dollar account in the United States. They maintain yen in Japan. They maintain Thai baht in Thailand. Whatever it is in Indonesia. And if I want to do an FX trade, they just take money from here, leave it there, and then send me yen from an account already in Japan. So they're not sending the money. They're not actually doing an FX trade. They're simulating an FX trade.
That's a great point, Michael. I mean, clearly you're very well aware of this model. That is the fintech model of the last 10 years. That's the fintech model of today.
Right.
You have pre-funded liquidity. Essentially, you're deploying pools of liquidity all around the world.
Everywhere, yeah.
And your advantage or your competitive differentiator is your network and the pools of liquidity you have access to. You're not really moving the money.
No.
But that comes at a cost.
Yeah.
Pre-funding comes at a cost.
Yep.
We think that the next generation of payments and blockchain infrastructure and shared ledgers, how can you move money 24/7 instantly without having to pre-fund this?
Right. So actually moving the money.
Actually moving the money, because that is why like the TransferWise and people like that have done a world of good for retail payments, right? Like, because you could do pre-funding for maybe a few millions of dollars.
I was going to say for $50,000, but you can't do it for $500 million.
Or for billions or for trillions of dollars, right?
Right.
So we as JP Morgan, we move 12 trillion every single day. You can't move that sort of money on a pre-funded model.
So this is one of the things I talk about all the time to people. I ask them how much money moves in the FX market every day, how much money is traded in the FX markets every day, and they're like, I don't know, a few billion dollars, and I'm like, how about $7 trillion? $7 trillion, right? $6.5 to $7 trillion a day in FX. Right. But you're right. If the ledger's not shared, it just becomes too not complex, but too time consuming. Too expensive.
And that is if you look at the genesis of financial infrastructure about 40, 50 years back, since everything has become electronified, right? Like different ledgers, Swift as the messaging network, coordinating the update of ledgers. What is a cross-border payment, or what is a payment? Debit of one ledger and credit on another ledger. Right.
And some math in between. That's it.
And coordinated by messaging infrastructure. What we are going to move to is shared ledgers where everything happens on one unified ledger.
Right.
Debits and credits are instantaneous. There's no payment breaks. There's no reconciliation.
So what is the impact of things like Pay Now, Prompt Pay, and then let's just focus on Asia and UPI in Asia, right? In India, excuse me. So this idea that they've created really frictionless payments.
For domestic payments.
But now they're starting to connect those systems as well. So that hopefully when I go to Singapore, I can just scan something. And then if they connect that to UPI in India, then you're talking about a much more consolidated payment system, but that's still not where you want to be.
That is still not where, because that is still the Wise model.
Yeah, no, I know.
But at a larger
that's
scale.
What I pointed out to people, sorry.
Exactly, because that still relies on the notion of having liquidity in different markets and different currencies.
Right.
The money is not actually moving. You have some gateway banks and they are deploying the liquidity. What we are talking about is how do you underlying move the liquidity cross-border, cross-currency.
So then what has to change in institutional sentiment? So you want to do this. Right? So Kinexys wants to do this. But that's reliant on the fact that every other big bank and small bank also wants to have a shared ledger experience. And how, like, what kind of mindset change is going to have to take place for that to happen? Or do we need, like, what do we need to make that happen?
So, see, one of the first things, as I said, is it's imperative that banks need to come on a 24/7 ledger in the first instance. A 24/7 programmable ledger. Now, what needs to change? That needs to change first. The second thing which needs to change is, while the FX markets are not necessarily 24/7, you need to have the ability to instantly get delivery of currencies. Like CLS, for example, has done a great job in terms of taking out settlement risk. But the way CLS operate is still in batch mode, right? Like how FX settlements work.
In batch mode.
Batch mode. No. And, you know, some of the people in the markets will argue with me, it's a feature, not a bug, because that takes out net settlement means you need lesser liquidity. Like if you try to settle each transaction on a gross basis, that's very expensive. There's a whole degree of complexity, but the point I'm trying to make is that you need to have the optionality to do this on an immediate delivery basis, 24/7 immediate delivery.
Right.
Now, will every single bank, like let's say Swift has 13,000 banks, or I don't know, roundabouts,
give
right?
or
Like
take,
11,000, 13,000. Will everything bank need to come on shared ledgers? I'm not sure. Like if you look at CLS, for example, as a model, CLS has probably something like 74, 75 direct participants. Everybody else participates through them. The other 30, 35,000 institutions don't. They
Right.
participate through them.
Right.
So maybe is that a model where some of the large banks come together on shared ledgers to start bringing some of these capabilities?
And are these shared ledgers? These have to be on blockchains or some kind of distributed ledger technology. And if they do, have we decided which protocol is best for this, or does it even matter?
I don't know about whether protocol matters. I think where the distributed nature of it comes into being is like, yeah, it's great to come on shared ledgers, but who's operating that ledger? Then you don't want to be on a single operator, right? Like cede control to a single operator. That is where like banks coming on shared but distributed ledgers, retaining a degree of control is where this.
So then what is this idea of the different, I mean, I know what the difference is, but there's, all the cool kids are talking about DeFi, right?
Yeah.
And TradFi. But what you're suggesting is like, who is operating that shared ledger? Because today, like you said, Swift runs this gigantic infrastructure.
Yeah.
But are we going to give this to Swift to run? Is it going to run decentralized? Is it going to be zero knowledge proofs? Like, who's going to run this and what protocol is it going to run?
So that is the question in terms of how does the governance around this work? How does dispute resolution work?
Yeah, right. Because that's always the big question, right? If no one's in charge, then how do you do dispute resolution?
So we've started doing work on that with Partier. Partier is a shared ledger infrastructure that us, DBS Bank, Standard Chartered Bank, Deutsche Bank, Emirates NBD, all of us have created. Partier is up and running. So Partier is a technology company, right?
Got it.
So we've already shown how this could work on a shared ledger across multiple banks and the efficiencies that could it bring.
Right.
Now, can it scale to hundreds and thousands of banks? It remains to be seen, but we've shown the genesis of what the idea could be.
What is the risk involved, though, of taking away, because you talked about countries having sovereignty.
Yeah.
At this point, the big banks, just like yours, right, they kind of have sovereignty over their own ledgers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned before that the countries don't want to do or aren't yet doing this kind of easily frictionless cross-border payments because they want to maintain sovereignty over their own currencies and over their own banking infrastructure. But how do we not take away the sovereignty from big banks as well so that, like you said, DBS and all the other banks in Singapore get together and do this and are still comfortable running that way?
It requires a mind shift change. So you don't lose sovereignty by mutualizing infrastructure.
Go ahead.
Is the argument that I would make.
Go ahead.
So you could still retain sovereignty by coming on shared ledger infrastructure.
Okay.
What shared ledger, this revolution really about distributed ledgers, shared ledgers, is when you come on common infrastructure, you create unprecedented mobility of collateral, unprecedented mobility of money.
And assets.
And
assets, right?
Assets.
Sorry, go ahead.
And the fungibility across all of that, right? Like that is what creates net new capabilities. That is what rewires finance.
Okay, so now you've opened up another really interesting topic for me. Right? Because we've been spending a lot of time talking about the movement of money.
Yeah.
And to be fair, if I want to take my money from Bangkok Bank and send it to Martin at SCB, it is seamless. And again, it's domestic, right?
Yeah.
But we didn't talk about moving any other assets.
Yeah.
At all.
Yeah.
Right? Just money.
Yeah.
And money's just one thing.
Yeah.
But what's really hard right now, for sure, is if I have an asset, another type of asset in a bank, whether there's a stock, a bond, an insurance policy.
Yeah.
Moving those types of assets around are almost impossible.
Yeah.
Right? Because the ledger's not shared.
Yeah.
But what is the implication for consumers and businesses if there's a shared ledger, and then I can move the assets around as well? Like, what does that look like?
What it looks like is that you can start unlocking what is trapped value. That is what. So what that means is, like, for example, you have fixed deposits.
Yep.
Yeah. The ability to tokenize them and access them for liquidity without necessarily breaking fixed deposits. Or, for example, mutual funds, money market funds.
Right.
The ability to tokenize money market funds and use that to access liquidity. The ability, like, it will fundamentally rewire capital markets, because if you look at the capital markets model, ever since the global financial crisis
in 2007,
2008,
a
lot of trading activity has come from OTC onto exchanges, and there's been a proliferation of central counterparty CCPs.
Right.
Why? To take out risk.
Yeah.
CCPs stand in between to take out risk, but CCPs are heavily collateralized. There's a lot of capital involved. It's not very profitable. I don't think even CCPs want to be in the business
Right,
of
they
CCPs.
don't want to be in the business anymore.
CCP, yeah.
They're not making any money
They're
doing
not making
it.
any money.
Right.
Like, but the ability of the technology, you come on shared ledgers, assets, money, all moving together, you dramatically diminish the role of a CCP and you can unlock all of that capital collateral and put that to productive use.
Right. So there's this feeling that if capital can move more easily around, then it just becomes easier to make different kinds of investments. It makes easier to break those investments into smaller pieces.
Smaller pieces and use that fungibility.
And use that fungibility to do other things that you can't do today. What does it do for product development?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because if there are certain products you couldn't even make today, what is the ability of because we're talking about a bunch of different technological shifts and implementations here, right? There's a shared ledger now, right? But everybody still has sovereignty and agency, right? But now you mentioned tokenization, like just out of the blue, which is great. No, it's great. I got it. But the idea is once you introduce those two things, what other types of products do you envision being made if you can actually accomplish that in a way that still makes sense, right?
I'll give you an example, right?
Please.
Like, see, typically, and probably you understand this, how large financial institutions are organized or on product verticals. You have payments, you have security services, you have
stock trading sits over here, bond trading sits over here, capital market sits over here.
So there are deep verticals, but there's not as much interconnectedness.
No.
What some of these capabilities do is build a lot more of the connective tissue. What does that really mean, right? Like like moving away from abstract to the more concrete. Let's take payments.
Yep.
Instant payments sometimes is not instant because of lack of instant liquidity.
Lack of
liquidity. Instant liquidity.
Yeah.
So instant payments, it's sometimes infrastructure is the challenge, sometimes liquidity is the challenge. The ability to tokenize collateral that you have, access liquidity for 2 hours, 1 hour.
Right.
Today's financial infrastructure, you can't access short-term liquidity.
Can't do it. It takes too much time.
It takes too much time. It's
too expensive.
Too expensive. So that is the net new products which they don't exist.
No, but they can exist.
But they can exist.
They can if it's tokenized.
That's correct.
Technologically today, without the tokenization, without the shared ledger, they can't exist.
They can't exist because it takes too long. Assets are on one ledger, cash is on...
By the time you're done doing the thing you want to do, your opportunities pass.
Exactly.
So what's the point of doing it?
Exactly.
Then you spend all this time and money doing it, and you're like, well, I don't want to do that anymore.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And you need this instantaneous access to it so you can take something, do something else with it, and then when you're done, bring it right back, and nobody knows the difference. Do you want to talk a little bit about stablecoins? You've mentioned it a couple of times, and like why they're so important.
I think stablecoins are just generally interesting simply from the standpoint of, like you used the example of fixed line telephony before, right? It's like what mobile telephones did to fixed line telephone, right? Like you don't have to be attached to an account anymore,
right?
To make payments.
I can tell you a funny story about fixed line, but go ahead.
Yeah. So that's the analogy, right? Like you don't need an account anymore. Like you could start making peer-to-peer payments cross-border without having to go through a web of correspondent banks.
Right.
But that's the simplistic answer.
Right.
Like I think once you dig 2 levels down in terms of compliance and regulation and AML and CFT and that's where the complexity emerges.
But where do you think simplicity comes in? And again, I'll tell you why. If I told my mother in like 1990 or 1991, you have to understand TCP/IP to be able to send an email, she would have kept writing me letters. Right, but she didn't because the interface and the user experience was good enough on, I can't even remember the name of the company anymore, but maybe it was Yahoo Mail. I can't remember what it was. Made it easy for her to send me emails, and that was like it was a paradigm change. Even today, I still think stable coins still feel a little bit like voodoo to most people. And I know you're talking mostly about big companies, and for them, they'll get it. But still, it still has to be easy for them to do.
There are a number of startups working on stable coins.
Yep, a lot of them.
Right, like so over time, we think that the user experience
is just going to get better.
It's just going to get better.
And do you think that filters up into big companies as well and filters back down?
Remains to be seen, right? Like remains to be seen.
Can I ask you this?
A
little bit out of the box, but like, let's say Kinexys is launching on like an Earth-like planet, right? So the atmosphere is there, people can walk around and stuff, but there's no existing financial system. And you're thinking, what's the first thing we build? What would that be?
Underpinning everything is money. The first thing that you need is a money infrastructure, right? Like that is what you would start with, and then everything else on top of it.
Okay. And another thing is, we talked a lot about tokenization,
Yeah.
but it's still kind of new.
Yeah.
What's a good strategy, whether it's for individuals or for big companies, to just start implementing this
Yeah.
and saying, where do we start? If we're an underwriter, do we take something that doesn't exist yet,
Yeah.
underwrite it right away with a tokenized asset?
Yeah.
Like, what's the process? What's the right way to start doing this for people that aren't involved yet?
So for financial institutions, I do think that the right answer is learning by doing.
Learning by doing, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
And the right way to do it is start introducing distributed ledgers to your banking infrastructure, to your banking stack.
Yeah.
Don't
This
keep-
is the key to everything
That
right
is the
now,
key
right?
to-
Sorry, go ahead.
That's the key to everything. Bank-specific infrastructure is going to go away. Like, just think about it, right? Like in the future where you have a worldwide ledger, there's not going to be any bank-specific core banking systems anymore or bank payment systems. Everything is going to be on a shared ledger.
So do you think, so here's another really important question for me. I mentioned insurance before. I have one of the largest insurance and insurtech podcast shows in the world.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time thinking about it, right? But do you think that shared ledger is going to have insurance assets on it, right? It's going to have like insurance policies on it, along with money, along with other assets.
It's going to be multi-asset. It's going to be multi-cash, right?
Yeah, it's going to have to be, right?
It'll have to be. Things like bank accounts will go away, right? Like people will not have bank accounts. You and I, and it's not like 50 years from now. This is not sci-fi. You and I will have wallets, and multiple banks will issue multiple liabilities and assets onto those wallets.
Right.
So this is not going to sit on bank-specific infrastructure. It's not bank-specific channels, bank-specific core banking. So banks will have to start thinking, instead of continuing to invest in building all of the stacks, hey, you guys, this public infrastructure is coming on.
Right.
We'll have to figure out how we operate on this public infrastructure.
So this is what I was going to ask you. So what do you worry about as a big bank, right? Because you wear two hats.
Yeah.
Right? You're working at a big bank, but also Kinexys, right? There's a relationship there. But if the back-end infrastructure is shared, and it's no longer an account, kind of thing, how do the banks differentiate themselves?
That's a great question. I don't have the answers.
Yeah, I know, and I don't want to answer per se, but like, are you worried? Are big banks worried about this? Do you talk about it?
So the thing is, like how you win today is not necessarily how you're going to win tomorrow.
I don't even think it's close, though.
Yeah, it's not even close.
Not even close.
Because all of the investments that you've made in infrastructure, which gave you that differentiation,
sure,
is going to go away.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So in that world, how do you differentiate?
Right.
Is it quality of your balance sheet? Like, why would a bank want to, or why would an individual or institution want to hold a JP Morgan issued token versus another bank's token? Like,
if it's fungible, right? So if a stable coin is a stable coin, it's a stable coin no matter what. Right? Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you.
So let's just talk about that. Like, that happens in bank accounts, right? Like, for example, today you have DBS, you have OCBC.
Right.
Like, now both are fungible, right? Like a DBS bank account and an OCBC bank account is fungible. That's how the financial architecture today works. The two-tier financial architecture, it creates the fungibility. Why do you open one bank versus the other? Quality of service, maybe the infrastructure.
Maybe.
But in a world of shared ledgers, all of that starts
to
going
be the
away.
Same.
Yeah. So how do you differentiate yourself? I think it goes down to what kind of value-added services can you add on top of that? It goes down to first mover advantage, like who builds credibility with the clients, who builds distribution.
So then you've just opened up so many questions in my mind. If we have a shared ledger, and this idea, this concept of a bank account kind of goes, let's just say it goes away. I'll give that to you. And we talked about differentiation, whether it's between OCBC, DBS, JP, whoever it is, right? What's the right way to say this? What does it actually look like from a consumer, and whether it's a consumer or a business experience, what does it look like to them when they interact with their banks? And I'll tell you what, today, I don't even feel like I have a bank account.
Yeah.
Because I never go to the bank per se.
Yeah.
It's kind of on my phone.
Yeah.
And all the money transfers that I do are on my phone, everything I pay for is there.
Yeah.
Like, what is it going to look like to us? What do you envision it looking like?
When you are interacting through those apps, they are still provided by a bank.
I know.
But in the world of 4 or 5 years, that's not going to be a bank provided app. It's going to be a wallet. And a wallet will have multiple bank issued liabilities. You might see a JP Morgan issued coin over there, a Citi issued coin over there. You might have a money market fund over there. You might have tokenized real estate over there. You might have Bitcoin over there. And all of these things will be fungible and you can do different things with it. I think to the end consumer, that will be the world we live in.
And fundamentally, you think this is a good thing. This is a better way to bank, right? And I put bank in quotes, but yeah.
I do think that, like, for institutions who maintain multiple banking relationships, you don't have to get onto multiple banking platforms.
Right.
Like, you could just come on to an interface, an app, which is tied to your identity.
If the back end changes and becomes shared, right, do you think all the front ends go away? So like my Bangkok bank app is just like vanishes because I have an overriding app that I use that connects all of these things and appears like just like one big monolithic bank to me. But then where does if that happens, like as a consumer and even as a business, makes my life so much easier because everything I do is fungible. And in a way, I don't care who does it as long as it works, right? But what does it mean from the banking perspective on a flip side? Because someone's going to build this layer on top, right? It's going to connect to everything. It's always been a thought that I've had that all that stuff can go away. If somebody disintermediates up here. Sorry, I wasn't supposed to put my hands around here. Somebody told me. Sorry, go ahead.
So, I mean, in many ways, that's happening in the crypto world, right? Like when you have wallets, for example. You could hold a USDC, you could have a Paxos coin, you could have crypto, like you could have many different things attached to your wallet.
Right.
Now, who builds that? I think it's a bit of an arms race because whoever builds that and whatever is the dominant wallet will own the client experience.
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of interesting to think about.
Yeah.
What else do you want to tell me that's going on in the blockchain world?
No, Michael, I do think that we are at the inflection point of global finance.
We are.
Tokenization is at the very early stage.
Yeah.
And the impact that it will have will be much larger than what digitalization did to innovation. This is about fundamentally rewiring the core of how financial markets work. It's not innovating at the fringes.
No. It's innovating at the core.
It's not building yet another payment gateway or yet another app.
So this is the last thing I want to ask you. What is the incentive, right? If all the back end becomes merged on a single ledger, right, or on a shared ledger, and if it becomes harder to differentiate on the front end, where does the idea that I want to innovate come from either big institutions or even startups, if it just feels like it's going to be subsumed into this monolithic thing that sits on a shared ledger? Do you know what I mean?
The innovation will come at top of that. So if you think about IMF...
but then what's going to stop? But what's going to stop? So right now, if a big bank has this innovative product, it's going to take some time for another bank to innovate the same product because they're going to have to go through all these other steps to get there, whether it's legal approval, compliant, like all this kind of stuff, and really understand how it works and the risks associated with it. But if it's all in a shared ledger, and the innovation's not happening on the fringes but at the core, then all that innovation is going to be shared immediately. No?
It becomes more like an app store model, right?
Like what?
App store model.
Yeah.
So if you think about...
But it does though, right?
It does.
Yeah.
So if you think about the framework of how you think about, right? Like, so there's the ASAP framework, ASAP, which IMF popularized. There's platform, there's assets, there's services, there's access.
Access, yeah.
So how do you access? That's the wallet.
Right.
The services you provide on that is basically the apps. Then you have the assets, which is the money and the assets.
My
and then
things,
your things. And then there's the platform. The platform will become the shared ledger.
That's the shared ledger.
So this is the framework, and there'll probably be different players straddling all of these things.
This layer is going to get really messy.
So the platform layer is clear. It'll be a shared ledger.
Everyone's sharing it. Everyone's contributing to it. Open source, maybe. Who knows?
Open source, right? Like assets, who provides what assets. The services part will be the interesting part, and the access.
You're right.
That is where
access should be universal.
Access should be universal, but somebody has to provide those access services. Like
someone's going to have to build that.
And you know how important it is to own the client experience.
Yeah.
So whoever owns the access almost owns the client experience.
Well, to be fair, I think if they own the access, they own everything else underneath it too, because they have, for lack of a better term, they have more immediate access to all of the things happening underneath it. And if I have access to you, there's got to be some late stage capitalism way that I can direct you to my services. And then I don't own, but I have access to your assets. And I don't care who runs the platform because it's like the phone system.
Probably, or the kind of access which will win is the most open access, which will give me the widest choice of services and assets.
Yeah. Exactly.
Which I guess is where you would
But this gets back to, again, Microsoft Windows. Right? That's the access. Right? But at the end of the day, they killed all the other, like, Microsoft, like they killed other Excels, other Words, other presentation platforms until the internet came around, and then they weren't necessary anymore.
the walled gardens
Yeah.
no longer existed.
No, it doesn't exist. And now the
Yeah.
walled garden goes to everybody, is what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
Okay. I really want to thank you for coming and doing this. Naveen Mallela, the global co-head of Kinexys and MD at JP Morgan Chase. I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Michael.
Thank you so
Thanks.
much.